Maybe I can now move the agenda on and hand over to our first panel. And this is bringing together digital leaders from the public service, from HMRC, DWP and the Home Office. And I'm delighted that Faye Holt, Head of Strategic Accounts, UK Public Sector at Amazon Web Services, is going to introduce the panel and lead the session. So Faye, let me stop and give you a chance to say you're here and you're ready.
Thanks, Julian. Yeah. So going to follow on from the kind of really good keynotes there that we heard from both Chris and Julia, some really insightful pieces. I'm now going to introduce our panel. We've got three great people today who we're going to have various discussions with over the next 50 minutes. So first off, we should have Joanna Davidson, the Chief Digital Data and Technology Officer from Home Office.
Hello, yes, I just gave you a wave there.
Hi, Joanna. And we should have Mark, the former CDIO of HMRC, on as well.
Yes, I'm here as well, Faye.
Thanks, Mark. Good to see you again. And we will have Craig Eblett, the Digital Director for Shared Platforms at DWP.
Hi, Faye. Thanks for inviting me.
Hi, Craig. And thanks very much. Craig is standing in for Simon McKinnon today. So thanks very much, Craig, for doing that. So over the next 50 minutes, we're going to kind of go through a course of looking back over the last 6 to 12 months, and we'll be commenting on some of the themes already mentioned from Julia around COVID and some of the agility and pace that brought to government, and how we can look to the future to maintain that pace. And we've also kind of going to run through a few of forward-looking ideas and opportunities, touching on both the kind of cross-collaboration between the DDAP functions within the government departments, but also where we want to be in a couple of years' time, and I'm going to look for your opinions of some forward-looking views. So we'll try and make this I'm sure it's going to be a really interesting panel. We do need to run to time, so if at any point we go completely off track, I'll probably pause and stop someone and kindly interrupt and put us back on pace. But first off, what I want to do is give you all 5 minutes or so to not only introduce yourselves, but get your kind of outline thoughts on your department's digital transformation journey over the last 12 months, including any highlights or successes that you want to mention, but also any challenges that you've had to overcome. So first off then, Joanna, I'd invite you to offer your thoughts and your own introduction, please, from the Home Office.
Thank you, Faye. Yes, so Joanna Davidson, I'm Chief Digital Data Technology Officer at the Home Office. I've been there now nearly 3 years, but came into the civil service from industry. I was formerly at IBM and before that at PricewaterhouseCoopers. So it's been a really interesting time to come into government, an awful lot going on. So a bit of a challenge, now about 4.5 minutes to sort of talk about what we're doing. We've never been busier in the Home Office. There's a very ambitious agenda that our ministers have, and digital data and technology is absolutely the heart of it. I would draw out sort of 3 groups of things that we're prioritising to get right. So the first is digitizing the customer experience, and that very much plays to the comments that the minister made earlier. In the Home Office, we've made a lot of progress on that. So we've got e-gates. I still think they're some of the best e-gates in the world. The digital passport service that some of you may have used, great service. And then the EU settlement scheme, which I would say is one of our big successes over the last 2 years, is actually getting a end-to-end digital service stood up from scratch. And we have now registered up to it's about 4 million people now. So that has worked brilliantly. And we're taking all of that learning into the Future Borders and Immigration System, which is the flagship program, which is about implementing points-based immigration for the UK. And ensuring that we've got a digital status for people travelling in and out of the UK, and we're digitising the border. So digitising the customer experience, still a lot to go in the Home Office, but some really exciting plans to get it done. Data, everybody's talking about it, and there's a lot more we can do with data. And in the Home Office context, we're certainly looking at what more we can do around the effectiveness and the efficiency of what we deliver. So better decision making, really important for us, being person-centric and having real-time data. It was raised in the context of the Windrush scandal that we didn't have the right data at the front line with our caseworkers, so we're working on how do we do that better. And then automation, lots of opportunity for automation, but we've got to be really careful about how we do it. There's really sort of big ethical considerations around it. In the Home Office, we don't there's no automated decision making, but there's a lot we can do to get the right data to people to make decisions more quickly. And then modernising our infrastructure. So obviously the journey to cloud, reducing our legacy is really important, but getting sort of common data platforms in place and getting some commonality across government as well, so that we can actually harness the power of data, really, really important. And I can't finish without talking about my favourite programme, the Emergency Services Network, which is about how do we put in place a modern 4G based commercial infrastructure for emergency services, which opens up fantastic opportunities around data exploitation going forward. From a COVID perspective, so we weren't in the eye of the storm as the Home Office, so actually our workload went down because people weren't travelling through the border and applying for visas. But actually, in terms of the department itself, I think we coped really well. Great work with our supply community to make sure that we maintain momentum on our delivery agenda, and we transformed our ways of working overnight. You know, everybody went remote. 30,000 people left the building, and we took more risk as we went through around some of the things we need to do to enable that, and that's good. It's enabled us to think differently about how we deliver things, but we've also got to be careful to make sure that we follow through and build the necessary resilience behind the risky things that we did, and that's we're having quite an active dialogue with ministers about that at the moment in terms of making sure we invest in that. Key things for the next year: a safe transition. We're very central to the transition agenda, but doing that whilst we maintain our delivery momentum on all the other programs, and building on the progress around interoperability that we made through COVID, particularly around data. So that's going to be incredibly important for us, and not losing the benefits of new ways of working. I mean, if I just finish with a comment about our supplier relationships with suppliers. I think in the Home Office, I've been really pleased over the last 6 months with how we've worked with our supplier community. It's been brilliant. I think part of the key to that is being quite open about what we're trying to deliver it both ways. We need to keep that up, but really, really important also that we're realistic in working with suppliers about what we can achieve over what timeframes, because we've got to maintain that sense of delivery confidence out there in our user community, and sometimes I think we set unrealistic expectations. So I'll be looking for suppliers to both challenge us about whether we're being forward thinking and ambitious enough, but also to be realistic about what's actually achievable in our context. Thank you. I'll pause there.
Yeah, thanks very much, Joanna. I think that was really insightful, and I'm sure we're going to be touching on some of those themes of data collaboration, and also I think you've second guessed one of my questions around how suppliers may be able to help, given that we've got a number of suppliers in the audience. So we'll be coming back to more of that point a little later on. Talking about a department that was maybe in the eye of the storm then in COVID, let's hand over to Mark, who was CDIO at the time of COVID for HMRC. Obviously, you've had a huge amount of COVID services platforms to stand up, not including the furlough scheme that obviously Julia talked about earlier as well. So Mark, do you want to offer any thoughts over the last 6 months and any challenges that HMRC faced?
Yeah, so Mark Denny. So I either fortunately or unfortunately joined HMRC in November last year, which was a very interesting time to join the organisation. My history is in banking, with 20 years experience in investment, corporate banking, through all facets of banking really. So quite new coming into HMRC. Just to talk about HMRC, you know, huge operation. We've got 50 million people that we interact with. We've got 60,000 colleagues that we had to get working from home quite quickly as the crisis hit. And we also process about 2 billion transactions a year. So, you know, as a unit, we're pretty big within government with an important role to play. In terms of taxation, I think people are rapidly changing in terms of how they do their work and how they want to pay their taxes. We're very attuned to this. Technology is right at the centre of what we're doing to try and make that happen. People are telling us that they want tax to be easy and they want it to be hard to get it wrong. So make it easy, make it digital, make it hard to get it wrong. So we're looking at policy, we're looking at process, and obviously looking at digital services that we can provide to the public on that. In terms of the COVID crisis, it really did turn the whole thing on its head for us. We had to really switch our processes from collecting money, which is what the tax authority does, to paying money out to individuals in the economy, which was a profound change. Some of the deliveries that we were delivering were the furlough scheme. We did another massive scheme, which was a self-employed scheme that helped probably about 3.5 million people. We did a statutory sick pay scheme for people going on to sick when they had caught the COVID virus. And then quite recently, one that I think we all benefit from was the Eat Out to Help Out scheme too. So we have literally been in the eye of the storm in terms of the government's response to the pandemic itself. Some of these technical solutions that we developed, they are full technical solutions, very complex, would normally take us across government probably in the region of about 15 months to get them up and running. Some of the schemes took less than 2 to 3 weeks from start to finish. They launched, had customer satisfaction ratings of 95% plus, and were incredibly well received within government and also externally as well, as one of the previous speakers was saying. So I'll leave it at that, but we've learned a huge amount about ourselves, about how we deliver technology, and some of our working practices that we're looking to expand. We also learned a lot about the fact that we have a lot of tech debt that we need to deal with going forward for the future. And we also learned a lot about our data limitations that we need to solve for in the future as well. Very quick one in terms of working with providers was in our need at the time where the pandemic hit and it became very clear that HMRC was going to be in the eye of the storm. The good news is our partners come running towards us and offered their services and really backed us 100%. So it was really lovely to see that. But it was also obvious that the way that we work with providers is not optimal in a lot of instances. So there's a lot of adjustments that we need to make there as well. I'm going to leave it at that because I think the conversation will definitely dive into some of these things, Faye. So I'll hand back to you.
Good, thanks very much, Mark. And I'm sure on kind of behalf of the audience as well, we would all like to give you a round of applause at the good job that HMRC have done in standing up those systems that would have no doubt made the headline newspapers if they hadn't have stood up as well. So thanks for that. So Craig then, finally handing over to you, if you'd like to quickly introduce yourself, give a bit of background and also comment on DWP over the last 6 months.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Faye. So I'm Craig Ablett. I'm Director for the Shared Platforms in the Digital Group, and I also had the pleasure of leading the Digital Group response to COVID-19 within the department. I think I probably echo some of Mark's views here, but I'd just like to start with a thank you to the DWP staff who, continue to attend their office and deliver an excellent service to the citizens. The broader civil service, public and private sector organisations who are within the ecosystem of DWP that we relied on massively during the last 6 months. We lent on them and they didn't let us down. And it's been, I think, a great experience to go through in many ways, but a huge thank you to everyone really. So in DWP, if I just take an internal view, first of all, obviously staff welfare and safety was paramount, and we needed to support colleagues to work from home, in a way that we've never done before. We went from an average of around 6,000 maximum, actually 6,000 maximum people working from home, to now averaging about 40,000, and we've achieved that in about a 3 to 4 month window. We have been doing this by dispatching devices directly to staff homes where at all we possibly can. It did feel a bit like PC World. We're dispatching these at around 750 a day to get the volumes up and being able to supply those services to citizens. But we've also, like Mark gave a few examples there, we've also been rapidly developing new services. And like I say, things that would have taken easily more than a year, from policy inception right through to delivery, have literally taken 3 and 4 weeks. And I think there's some key lessons there for us. And in the last 4 months, we've deployed 6,000 changes to the production environment across the DWP estate. It obviously is huge, it is vast, but we've had to deal with unprecedented increase in demand for our services. And just on that, we've had a 10-fold increase in claims to universal credit. And at the same time, we've had to change the operating model for UC. You know, the model that we did have wasn't working, could not have coped with this demand. We had to put a number of what we call easements in place to help deal with those volumes coming through. And I'd also like to give a shout out to HMRC as well, who really supported us with the enabling citizens to remotely verify with us as well. So we use their services to help us with that. And we've had over 250,000 citizens go through the HMRC journey with us and make sure that they're able to claim without coming into for a face-to-face identity check. We've done all this, obviously, we've had the challenges in organisation of, you know, working from home and doing things differently, but we've also got now the upswing in the recession, and we've, in the last 6 months, we've recruited 8,000 new staff into DWP. And we're currently recruiting at around 250 a week, and we're going to accelerate that towards 500 a week over this next few weeks' time. So just reflections from a digital perspective on this. I think we've certainly gone faster and further than we ever thought was possible. And there's no doubt it's broken down barriers and expectations of ourselves and of DWP, of ministers and across government have just massively increased. And that's great, great to see. We've also done some changes to our governance and accountabilities that have really enabled us to focus on outcomes. And I'd summarise that by saying less bureaucracy, more delivery is a general theme, which has been, I think, really, really good. And I'd probably like just to give a few more shout outs. I think GDS, if I reflect on the last 5 years in working in digital and government, you know, I don't think we could have been here and dealt with this in quite the same way without the support of GDS and building up the profession and setting the standards. Nor could we have done this without building up the capability in government, but also that we've got a far better leverage mix of suppliers who are supporting us as well. And we've got far greater diversity and greater specialisms as well. So I think if I think back to say 3, 4, 5 years ago, I'm pretty confident in saying DWP could not have coped with this crisis in quite the same way that it would. And I'll just leave it there. I know there's some other things we'll get onto about cross-working across the departments in the future, but if I just leave it there, if that's okay.
Good, thank you very much, Craig. Yeah, that kind of brings us nicely on to our next topic. And I see we've got some good interactions coming in on the chat already. Hopefully we'll be able to have kind of time for 1 or 2 questions towards the end of this panel. But when we've talked about the increased pace of agility, both in terms of procurement and actually of delivery within the departments, how you've done things that may have taken, you know, 12, 14 months down to 2 or 3 weeks. What's next for government? How do we harness this and ensure that kind of this supercharged pace of digital transformation can continue over the next few years? And what are our lessons learned to implement now going forwards? So, Craig, I'm happy to kick off with you, given you've got the mic already.
Yeah, sure. I think I just echo something that Mark had said around are we making the best use of the broader community to come and engage with us and help us really with this challenge. For sure, we cannot do this on our own. We've never been able to do this on our own. You know, it's a huge endeavour for the country to deliver the welfare state. If I just give a little bit of a shout out, we are going to have a supplier day coming up in October. So please do reach out and I'll make sure the details get across to anyone who needs to see that. But we're going to set out at the supplier day what our transformation journey over this next period of time, the spending review period, is going to look like. And you know, we definitely need help in bringing that to life and making it a reality. But we'll also need to engage in different ways than we have done up to now. So the supplier day is the start of a process where we're going to go to leveraging some of the existing frameworks in government, but also putting in place a really diverse mix of suppliers who can come support us. Yes, we need large scale, big suppliers, because that's what we need at times. AWS is a good example of that fair, but also we need more specialist organizations and more local organizations that will be able to come and support us. Just on this transformation journey in this next year or two, really want to now focus on putting the citizen at the heart of DWP and government, not just at the heart of an individual service or product. And I think the MP that was speaking just before us was talking about that. So it's very much on our mind. We want to make a far greater use of the APIs. So taking an API first approach. We want to really use that not just in DWP, but also across government as well. And we also wish to really focus on this removal of technical debt. You know, we've got a huge amount, and if I just give a shout out to some of my colleagues, for those that don't know, DWP pays out about £170 billion a year in welfare, and we generate as a department a third of all interbank transactions in the UK. Right, so it's a huge endeavour. We've just upgraded that last weekend. You know, some really out of date technology, and we've brought that back into good support and good. Nevertheless, it's a huge monolithic application that needs to be broken down, and we need to remove that from the estate. And that, you know, we need to do these things at pace now, as we've learned from COVID. So we can do this, but we're going to need a lot of help.
Good. Thanks, Craig. I think that's really good for all the suppliers who are in the audience to hear about as well.
Thank you.
So Mark, then, do you want to comment on that? I know a lot of the focus has been on HMRC at the moment. How are HMRC going to move forwards with this and kind of keep that pace of delivery that they've used to deliver those COVID platforms?
Yeah, so I suppose what really helps is to talk about how it traditionally would work, and then talk about how we've done it differently, and then what lessons we can take forward. If that's okay. So in the past, you would have many departments and different groups involved in this kind of work, and it's done in a very serial manner. So it's handed off from one group to the next. So there'll be a bunch of people who advise the Chancellor, for example, who is very central to these schemes. They would work with the economic team that sits within the Treasury department. That would go to General Treasury for funding and then for project management. It would then go to the policy team within HMRC. It would then go through sign-off with Jim Harrer, and then eventually it would trundle its way down after probably 6 to 9 months to the technology team, who would then turn around and say, we can't deliver this, or it's going to be a long time before we can.
Yeah.
So complicated. So there's a way of working and a bureaucracy that surrounds that doesn't talk to moving quickly within government. So what we did was we put that to one side completely, and we worked in, I'm sure that the tech community will love to hear this, we worked in a very agile manner, a very aggressively agile manner, in terms of a super amount of empowerment for the people doing the work. And what we also did was we put the user, so the person who would be using the service, right at the center of design. So we used a phrase which was coined from myself, which was ruthlessly simple and ruthlessly focused on delivering the outcome for the citizen. There was no bells and whistles. It was basically what it was meant to do on the tin, and that was it. And when I talk about agile, I really talk about actually having the Chancellor, right, as high as that, almost in an agile way of working, and then having the tech people, the right tech people, in the room from the start. So an example of that would be the conversations were right out the box talking about the art of the possible, how we'd use the technology to achieve his ambition, and then working with him to iterate solutions to match the two things together, which allowed us to start coding and building the technology within 24 hours, right? So what we'd done necessarily was condensed a 9-month process into a 24-hour period, okay? And then what we did was we used very aggressive agile methods to iterate the solution very quickly, building and testing, which enabled us to commit to timelines of somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks to get these things up and running, and then obviously launch and everything else. So it was profoundly different. And what we're doing now is, and people are right, you know, the expectation all of a sudden when you talk to the Chancellor, which we do on a regular basis, is I want this within 4 weeks. I want to use the same methodology. I want to make this happen. I want to work like this in the future. So the expectation is there from government and from the ministers and from the people who have to make this work. And what they're doing is they're driving a mind shift within the civil service to make sure that we can work this way in the future. What we're also doing in the technology world is making sure that we're prepared to do that. We're sharing the lessons learned. And what we're also doing is reorientating some of our partners to enable us to move at this speed in the future too. I'll come back and talk a bit about how we used our assets and how we use the technology differently for this as well. But I think that's a different question, but we can come back and talk a bit more about that. Okay, well that's kind of what we did, how we did it differently, and how it's setting a different expectation, and how, you know, we're gearing ourselves up to be able to operate like this in the future. And then we'll come back and talk about the tech.
Good, thanks very much, Mark. So let's kind of pick up the pace a little bit. I've noticed some themes coming through on the chat, so I'm going to try and get 5 or 10 minutes to walk through some of the main themes that have come through there. But maybe turning to Joanna then. You know, we've talked a lot about what we've done so far, where we've come from, what's happened over the last 12 months throughout the government departments. In your kind of opening statement, you also touched on a little bit about the commonalities, especially you three as government organisations have in common around the DDAP functions. Could you talk a little bit about how we're going to cross-pollinate ideas and solutions within the DDAP functions? What are you three doing already, specifically from a Home Office perspective with future borders, etc., looking over multiple departments? But what more do you think we can be doing looking towards the next few years to help the facilitation of collaboration between departments?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, there are some structures that force us to talk to each other. I mean, you mentioned Future Borders. There's a very active set of engagement around the Future Border in a number of different contexts where the teams come together and work together. I mean, GDS plays quite an important role in ensuring that we have a community of CDIOs who engage and share, and we have some more, some less formal get-togethers as a group of CIOs. But I think, and we've touched on it in the chat bar as well. And one of the things that I think is going to be really important going forward is that we have quite a strong central perspective on standards, and this is particularly in the data context. You know, I'm less, I mean, we're a big department, we've got quite a lot of capability to actually do delivery, so I'm less interested in sort of having people sort of deliver common cross-government solutions for us, but being really clear about the standards that we should all be operating to, and actually probably looking at, you know, where there are services that a department could deliver on behalf of the whole community. I think those are the ways we need to go. We have to look at accountabilities and funding models to make that work, but I would like to see us do more of that. I think it's a really important agenda for the new CDIO, permanent secretary level CDIO, to pick up. I'm really looking forward to that individual arriving.
Yeah, I think you've made some really good points there. Is there any further comments, Craig or Mark, that you would want to pitch in terms of data collaboration? And then I've got a specific topic from the chat that I think we should pick up as well.
I'll just jump in, but I think, you know, since the departments were created and since digital was here, I mean, we have been sharing data, we have been connecting. But it is quite sporadic, and it's normally on very specific use cases that we share. What we see in DWP, and we do share with all the local authorities and you know, across government as well. There are lots of different kinds, styles, approaches to how we actually sharing that data. So I just echo what Joanna was saying about the application of standards and getting that correct. I think will be a key feature for us. But in essence, we need to do a lot more. We're not doing enough to work across the digital functions across government to help bind this together.
Yeah, and from a supplier's perspective, I think there's a certain role suppliers can play in that, in bringing communities within government together as well. I'm sure we can all help out in that respect. And Mark, any further comments from you?
Yeah, I mean, data is obviously the big thing that we're focused on at the moment. It's harmonisation of the legal ability to share data, which is sometimes a blocker. And then it's having a common share philosophy and platform to do so. I think what you've got is you've got a couple of big departments that have very deep data repositories. And if you can tackle those big departments and bring them together and put them onto a common framework, you get the goodness, 80% of the goodness quite quickly. So that's one thing that we're talking about. What we're also doing is we're pitching in the spending round, which is currently going on, a number of cross-departmental digital-led propositions where we start to build centres of excellence and start to share some of the great assets that we have more across a government. So that's the second thing. And I would say, you know, there's definitely a change in the Cabinet Office in terms of wanting to create this goodness and wanting to as well make sure that when we're talking to suppliers, we're joined up. Because I think at the moment we're not. And from department to department, we're turning up very differently in a lot of instances. So that harmonisation of how we turn up to our key providers, cloud being a classic, we need to be more joined up and be a better buyer of services and a better client, basically. So that are the three areas I would pick out as the first things.
Thanks, Mark. I think you were quite negative inward looking then, but appreciate the kind of, you know, your reflections on where you are in terms of procurement, etc. We've had an overwhelming amount of talk on the chat, and I'm trying to keep a close eye on that. But one of the common themes that I'm seeing coming through that I think it's worth touching on is pretty much around legacy IT. And without picking out a question directly, there's an emerging theme of how do we keep this pace of moving off legacy IT and moving on from that within the large government departments. In particular, if we touch on some of the things that CCS and GDS are doing around tech debt, legacy IT, you know, there seems to be a broader strategy around that as a whole, and intensity to try and propel that within the next 12 to 24 months. So I'd welcome, Mark, maybe as you spoke last, I keep switching the order, so I do apologise for keeping everyone on their toes. But Mark, do you want to comment on legacy IT and how we can speed up the pace? And also any insights into what centralised government are doing in terms of helping build that momentum as well?
Yeah, so, you know, in terms of the spending round that we're going into, it's a huge topic of conversation. We have lots of it, and in differing ages, let's call it, but, you know, it definitely is there. It's proliferated quite badly over the years and hasn't been dealt with. And it now is getting to the point where, number one, it's very expensive and we're wasting money on it. And number two, it's holding us back in terms of moving quickly and being innovative. So it has to be dealt with. So, you know, HMRC, for one, has ensured that that features very strongly in the bids that we're making as we go through the spending round that's currently in flight. And what we're talking about doing is consolidating and updating, but using the money effectively. So what we don't want to do is just update an old application onto a new set of hardware. We want to make sure that it's transformative at the same time. So we're being quite smart about how we describe it and how we go about the work. There's also another thing, right, which is on the COVID schemes, we've got legacy over here. So we've got all legacy stuff. And we've also got quite a modern digital platform that sits on the cloud. And the way that we did the COVID schemes was to keep all the kind of busyness over here on the modern, flexible, cloud-based digital service that we've got, and limited what went back into the old legacy world that we could throttle, manage, and use that in an effective way. So I think what we've proven to ourselves as well is by using the assets more cleverly, we can still move at pace. We can still what we need to do what we need to do, and it'll give us a chance and buy us time to sort out this legacy bit over here at the same time. So we're thinking very differently about how we architect and how we use the assets that we've got within HMRC, at least. I think you might be on mute.
Oh, thank you. You knew that was going to happen eventually. Thanks for that insight. I think HMRC are undergoing a huge transformation, one of which will have its own challenges, but particularly around legacy IT. And I think that kind of offering of making sure you keep the lights on whilst trying to transform is one that's particularly challenging. So let's turn to Joanna then. And Joanna, I know there's a specific question on the chat, particularly in regards to funding models. And I'm sure there's quite a dilemma particularly as you go through spending reviews, on whether you invest in the legacy to keep the lights on, or whether you actually turn that money and put it into a new system. So I don't know if that's a specific area within that legacy theme that you want to comment on.
I mean, I can comment. It all comes down to risk, doesn't it? So, I mean, I'd say in the Home Office we are trying to balance that risk. We, as Mark says, I mean, we've taken the approach that in replacing our legacy, it isn't just about replatforming. It is about how do we actually transform and create the digital services and the data services that our citizens and our ministers, need us to deliver for the future. That takes some time, and in many cases we're replacing. The oldest system in my portfolio is 47 years old, which is the Police National Computer, and it is absolutely central to law enforcement. We cannot stuff it up. So really, really important that we maintain operational service at the same time as we go on that transformational journey. So yeah, we have some very active conversations about how we balance it. It's quite challenging, I would say, because I think the understanding of why you need to get that balance right is better developed within the digital data and technology functions than it is within the minds of our ministers and senior civil servants. So we've got a lot of responsibility within DDAT to explain the options and the choices that we're putting in front of our seniors. But yeah, it is a balance. Yeah, I'll stop there. I mean, it's challenging. It's tricky, but it's really, really important that we manage that process, because I mean, let's be honest, if I look at the Home Office, some of our big legacy, one of our ministers gets cross when we call it legacy, because he keeps reminding me it's our existing operational systems, and he's right. Those systems are actually what keeps us running at the moment. So we have to ensure that we keep them performant all the way through to the point at which we can replace them.
Yeah. And I think you said it was 47 years was your oldest system. It's 42 or 47.
47.
I certainly can't imagine trying to keep the lights on a system that old and that critical. So, and Ria's job that you've got there in terms of keeping the lights on that particular system and bringing that to the forefront of technology. So Craig, then, any final thoughts from DWP on, moving away from legacy, trying to transform with all the risks and factors that are associated with that, whilst trying to move at pace? Any final thoughts from you on that one?
I think just very briefly, I mean, it's obviously a hugely complex area. If it was easy, we would have dealt with it before. This is really difficult. Funding has a big issue, accounting officer issues, but there is a massive drive for this. It is expensive, but probably the biggest barrier for us is policy dexterity. It's that ability to respond rapidly, to stuff. And I know there are things that our ministers would have really liked for us to have done that we were simply unable to deliver. And that's the reality. So I think that and enabling us to deliver better outcomes for citizens and deliver on the government's objectives is really key. So we do need to get rid of this. Similar to Mark, we're taking a strategic view of this. We have a strategic way forward. We're putting a stranglehold on changes and advancements in this legacy world. We're putting in bridges between that legacy world and the new world, taking an API first and an integration approach to how we're connecting these services together. And equally to HMRC, and I'm sure that Joanna as well in the Home Office, our spending review has a key feature in it about removing technical debt and being able to transform to a new state.
Good, thanks, Craig. I think the technical debt conversation, I wish we had another hour to go through the rest of the themes on the chat. I think there's some really interesting questions there that I'd love to hear answers to. But in terms of technical debt, I think the supplier community have got a large part to play. Some are incumbent providers of that legacy platform, and taking that to the future state. And some obviously will be helping the departments on that transformation journey. So in terms of, we've got a lot of suppliers in the audience. I'm interested to hear from each of you on kind of your final thoughts about how suppliers can best help support your transformation journey moving to the next couple of years. So Craig, do you want to touch on that one first?
Sure. So aligned with the direction of government this last 10 years, we in DWP Digital have been taking far greater control and ownership of our strategic vision, direction, building up that capability, internal capability, but also leveraging many of the suppliers out there who we need to come and support us. The biggest thing we need is the ability to ramp up quickly, as we have done. So I think that flexibility, and we need to be a better customer at that, and being able to show that flexibility. We need some of the best skills out there in the market. This is a huge challenge. This is huge scale, huge complexity, but a really worthwhile cause for all of us. But we need to get greater access to those kinds of skills and capabilities. And I know there was a question on the role of system integrators. Now, for DWP, that's not our strategic direction. We're not looking to outsource chunks of the digital environment, in a way which is outsource the outcome delivery. It's more about, please work with us, to help drive better outcomes for DWP. Okay.
Good. Yeah, thanks, Craig. And I know it's particularly hard to kind of keep an eye on that chat whilst talking as well. So I appreciate you commenting on that one. I'm trying to do the same thing. So Mark, any thoughts from you, or what would you like to see more of from suppliers to help that transformation journey?
Yeah, I think, let's be honest, right? When we work best together is when we understand what the providers can provide, and you guys understand what we're trying to do in terms of our strategic direction. So we have plans to be a lot more on the front foot in terms of sharing vision, strategy, what we're trying to do. We've identified a number of areas where we're looking to accelerate and really leverage external intelligence and support where we think we can get ahead and get an advantage. I would name data as an area where we're going to try and pull people in to help us with. And then what we've also got on top of that is we've got a model at the moment that doesn't always make sense, right? We've kind of stumbled and fumbled our way into supplier relationships that are not always productive. So we're looking to do a bit of a reset around that as well, and decide what we should be doing and deciding what we should be buying, and making sure that we're getting the best bang for the buck, and we've got that strategically positioned the best way. I completely believe, personally, that having this split and this supplier model is absolutely right for government, and bringing people in to help accelerate in certain areas. So when I talk about that bit at the end around the model, I'm not advocating trying to pull everything back in-house by any stretch of the imagination. What I'm talking about is just trying to optimize it and get value in the right place to help us accelerate. That's what I've highlighted, definitely.
No, thanks very much, Mark. We've got time for one final question. We'll have to make it fairly quick before we do wrap up. But it's been almost a decade then since the report was put in place that helped form GDS, and throughout the time we've had the various kind of iterations of G-Cloud, we've had the one government cloud strategy come in, we've had the cloud first policy. And Joanna, I'm wondering if you could give us your opinion on thoughts on whether we need now another revolution for the next decade or the next 5 years looking forwards, or even, what do you see us landing in 3 years' time? What do you think's next from a government transformation point of view?
So I think I'm not sure we need another revolution. I'm not sure a very disruptive approach would be helpful at this stage. I think we've all kind of got the understanding of, you know, where we need to go. What I would see, I mean, I think we've talked a lot about data, you know, so clearly getting a grip on data and how do we share better, and how do we and how do we get that kind of interoperable kind of perspective around data is really, really important. It is also, as I said in the chat, really, really complicated. And I think one of the things that's going to be quite important in their next iteration of what we do is that we don't just go at it from a digital data and technology perspective, but we recognize that it needs to be aligned with the way in which we make decisions, the way in which we fund things, probably legislation and regulation around what can be shared and what can't be shared. And I mean, as Mark was saying, some clarity around, you know, where we're going to build our in-house capability versus what are we going to, where do we need to build relationships across the wider supply chain. Because I absolutely echo what Mark says. We and Craig has said the same thing. You know, this is a partnership. We are not going to insource everything. We're not going to outsource everything. We need to find a way in which we can work effectively across the entire supply chain to deliver things we need to deliver. So I think those are the important things. Rather than a revolution, I think it's an evolution, but based on some real clarity around what we're trying to achieve across the government agenda.
Yeah, and Joanna, I you know, from an outsider, from a supplier working with government, the various things you've had to deal with over the past kind of 4 years on the periphery in terms of EU exit and the pandemic coming along, I think there's been enough on your plate to keep you all busy without kind of transforming again. But over to Mark and Craig then for final thoughts on that one in the last 2 minutes. Are you on that same page? Are you thinking any differently? Is there anything you'd like to see coming out in the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'll go first, Craig, then I'll bounce it to you. So for me, I think citizen expectations around the taxation system, at least, are changing incredibly rapidly. I think the way that people are working is changing quite profoundly. So, you know, the digital expertise and the speed that we move at needs to go up. So that's one thing that we're really focusing on, trying to make sure that we are very citizen-centric and that we're moving at pace. What we intend to do is invest and deepen our capability in that microservice-based digital cloud-based platform that we have. It's an incredibly useful asset that we can leverage and have leveraged through the COVID scheme. So we're going to deepen that and we're going to kind of bring it up to date even more. And then, to be quite honest, tech debt and data would be a revolution. It would be an absolute revolution. I'm sure these guys would agree as well.
Completely.
Getting rid of that tech debt, being able to move at pace, not being encumbered by a 42-year-old system, and then basically being able to join data up across government and provide services to the citizen which are truly joined up with single sign-on and an easy way into government, I think will be a massive revolution. And I think that's what we need to focus on. And that's what the Minister was saying at the start as well. And I completely agree. So they would be my closing thoughts.
Good, thanks, Mark. I think what I heard there was executing on the strategy that's out there, maintaining this path and getting that pace and momentum up to execute on that would actually get us to the revolution that we've needed. And so Craig, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, if I look at the books for the next few years, it looks pretty full to me from a DWP perspective. We're going to have lots of challenges, and not least of which is continuing COVID-19 and its implications for the country. I don't believe revolution would actually be helpful here, but I would love to see. I'm not saying it's going to be reality. I would love to see us think very differently in terms of how government engages with citizens. And if I take DWP as an example, there are over 40 benefits that under certain circumstances claimants can think. DWP is really, really complex, and I've worked in DWP for 20 years and still only know some of it, right? But I think expecting our citizens to understand and navigate the welfare state or the taxation system or the Home Office services is really, really complex for people. So if we can find a way of coming and working differently and putting citizens at the heart of government and the services we provide, rather than the heart of an individual department or an individual service or product. I think that could be transformation, but let's not have a revolution about it.
Good, thanks very much. So thank you to all of you, really insightful thoughts and opinions there. We did try and get through some of the chat, but I'm conscious that there are many questions there. We could have gone on for a few hours, but just bringing us to time then, fantastic opportunity to hear from you all together as well. That's quite a unique panel we've had. So certainly looking forward to the next 12 months and where we're going to get up to on executing that strategy. So with that then, thanks to you all, and I'll hand back to Henry.